They called him Barbarossa, the Redbeard who ruled the sea. To some, he was a pirate, to others, a hero. But to Europe's most powerful empires, he was a nightmare that wouldn't go away. He wasn't born into power. He didn't wear a crown. He built his empire from the deck of a ship, with a sword in one hand and loyalty in the other. But who was Khairuddin Barbarossa, really? In this story, you'll see the boy before the beard. You'll witness the rise of a brotherhood that turned the tides of history. You'll understand why his enemies feared him and why his allies followed him into impossible battles, without question. You'll hear the real stories, how he fought after his brother's brutal death, how he turned pirate vengeance into Ottoman glory, and how he became the greatest admiral the Islamic world had ever seen. But beyond the battles and flags, this is the story of a man who lived for loyalty, fought for honor, and never forgot where he came from. This is the life of Khizr, later known as Khairuddin Barbarossa. And once you know it, you will never see the sea the same way again.
He was born at the year 1478 on the island of Lesbos in the Aegean Sea. His father, Yakub Aga, was a former soldier from the Ottoman cavalry, a man of discipline. His mother, a local Greek woman, raised the family near the water, 4 brothers, all drawn to the sea. But it was Aruj, the elder brother, who carved the path that Khizr would one day follow. Aruj was bold, restless, the kind of man who didn't wait for permission to chase freedom. He became a sailor, then a corsair, a sea warrior who fought not just for gold, but for resistance. The Mediterranean was on fire. Spain and Portugal had taken Andalusia. Muslims and Jews were being expelled, tortured, hunted. And while kings argued in palaces, Aruj took to the water to rescue the helpless from the burning shores. Khizr didn't stay behind for long. He followed Aruj, not for riches, not for power, but for something deeper. Brotherhood, purpose, revenge against injustice. Together, the brothers built a small fleet. They started rescuing refugees from Spain, attacking enemy ships, striking where empires felt safest. Europe called them pirates, but to those they saved, they were something else: protectors. That bond between Khizr and Aruj wasn't forged in luxury. It was built in storms, in skirmishes, in the silent looks exchanged before a battle. And Khizr, always thinking ahead, not just of the next ship to seize, but of something greater. He didn't want to be a pirate forever. He wanted to shape the sea itself. By the early 1500s, the Mediterranean was bleeding. Christian and Muslim powers clashed at sea. Cities were raided, civilians caught between crusades and counter-crusades. But among the chaos rose 2 brothers. Aruj and Khizr had become more than corsairs. They were now symbols of defiance. They hit European ships with precision. They freed slaves. They returned Muslim families to North Africa, saving thousands from the Spanish Inquisition. Their base? The North African coast. They began fortifying Tunis, then moved toward Algiers, building alliances with local rulers. Aruj, the bolder of the 2, took greater risks. But Khizr, always quieter, was the strategist. He didn't fight just to win, he fought to last. The brothers earned a reputation for outwitting larger fleets. European merchants started avoiding the central sea routes altogether. And in royal courts from Rome to Madrid, their names were spoken with contempt and fear. Spain, enraged by the brothers' growing power, launched campaigns to stop them. They called them pirates, devils, sea demons, but deep down,
They knew the truth. These weren't men chasing loot. They were carving a navy, one ship at a time, with a mission behind every self. 1518, the Spanish made their move. They launched a full-scale assault on Tlemcen in present-day Algeria, a place Arouge had recently claimed. Heavily outnumbered, surrounded by treachery and betrayal, Arouge and his men held out for as long as they could. But Arouge was captured. He was executed, and his body was mutilated, displayed like a trophy. For Khizr, it wasn't just the loss of a brother. It was the loss of the man who gave him purpose. The man who showed him what it meant to stand for something greater. They hadn't always spoken much, but Khizr knew every scar on Arouge's hand. And now, there would be no more of that. He buried the grief, quietly, and raised a new flag. Khizr took the name his enemies had given them both, Barbarossa, and made it his own. But this time, he wasn't fighting just to survive. He was fighting to build, to avenge, to honor a blood oath. He took control of his brother's fleet. He reorganized it, trained it, strengthened its discipline. And then, he did something no corsair had done before. He offered the fleet, not to any sultan, not to a local ruler, but to the Ottoman Empire. He knew that to fight Spain, Portugal, and the Knights of St. John, he needed more than rage. He needed a navy backed by the greatest Muslim power of the time. And in doing so, Khizr Barbarossa turned from outlaw to admiral. In 1519, Khizr made a bold move. He offered the strategic port city of Algiers, the very land he and Arouge had fought for, to the Ottoman Sultan Selim I. This wasn't surrender. This was alignment. Barbarossa wanted backing, cannons, soldiers, political power, and in return he would turn the Mediterranean into Ottoman water. The Sultan accepted, and in return he gave Khizr something more than rank. He gave him a name, Khairuddin, meaning goodness of the faith, a name that honored not just his victories, but his mission. He had rescued thousands of Muslims from Spanish slavery. He had fought for the displaced, for the weak. Now, his fight had a flag behind it, and a purpose that echoed across empires. From this point on, Khizr would be remembered as Khairuddin Barbarossa. He was appointed Beylerbey, governor of North Africa. But he didn't stop there. Years later, under Suleiman the Magnificent, Khairuddin was named Capudan Pasha, Grand Admiral of the Ottoman Navy. He wasn't just a corsair anymore. He was leading one of the most powerful navies in the world. But he didn't trade power for comfort. He didn't retire into court life. He returned to the sea. Khairuddin Barbarossa rebuilt the Ottoman fleet, turning scattered ships into a unified force. He brought discipline, precision, and his unique blend of pirate cunning and military strategy. Where other commanders hesitated, he struck first. He introduced faster ships, guerrilla-style sea tactics, and psychological warfare. His fleets moved like shadows, silent, unpredictable, devastating. The Mediterranean changed. Lines on the maps shifted, and Christian Europe had to face a new truth. The sea was no longer theirs to command. It now had a master, and his name was Khairuddin Barbarossa. There was a story in fiction. Khairuddin Barbarossa wasn't just winning battles. He was reshaping the map, with sails instead of ink and fire instead of diplomacy. Once under the Ottoman banner, he began a campaign that stunned Christian Europe. His most famous strike came in 1538, at the Battle of Preveza. The Pope had formed a Holy League, an alliance of European powers including Spain, Venice, and the Papal States, to crush Barbarossa once and for all. They sent Andrea Doria, one of Europe's finest naval commanders, with over 300 warships. Barbarossa had fewer than 130, but he had something they didn't: absolute control over his men and a deep understanding of the sea. He studied the coastline. He used narrow straits to his advantage. He waited, then struck with terrifying precision. In a few hours, The mighty fleet of the Holy League was scattered. Europe's finest were forced to retreat, humiliated. The Ottoman Empire, through Barbarossa's leadership, had become the unchallenged naval power of the Mediterranean. And it didn't end there. Barbarossa led daring raids along the coasts of Italy, France, and Spain. He captured entire islands, freed enslaved Muslims, and brought European prisoners back to Algiers by the hundreds. But unlike many pirates, he didn't allow looting or chaos. He demanded order. He punished any of his men who harmed civilians without cause. To him, this wasn't lawless conquest. It was calculated warfare. And across Europe, whispers grew louder. The Red Beard is coming. In ports and palaces, fear spread like fog, because by then, it wasn't just the Ottomans who saw Barbarossa as a commander. He had become a symbol. To his enemies, terror. To his people, protection. To history, a master of the sea. Khairuddin Barbarossa was more than a man. He was a storm that couldn't be charted, a shadow that came with the tide. And royal courts from Madrid to Venice, his name was spoken like a warning, not with admiration, but with a mix of fear, hate, and reluctant respect. They called him the Sea Demon, the Red Terror of the Mediterranean, the scourge of Christendom. But even behind their hatred, they couldn't ignore his genius. Andrea Doria, the great Genoese admiral who once lost to him at Preveza, refused to sail near his waters again. He never underestimated Barbarossa after that, because he'd seen firsthand how fast a victory could turn into a trap. European merchants altered trade routes just to avoid crossing paths with him. And coastal towns in Spain and Italy built watchtowers, stationed night guards, and rang bells at the first sign of sails with crimson flags. But fear wasn't just political, it was personal. European captains whispered that Barbarossa didn't fight like a man. He fought like a shadow. Ships swore they saw his fleet, dozens of warships, then lost them in the fog, only to be attacked from the opposite direction. Ports swore he was sailing north until he appeared from the south hours later. How did he do it? Even today, no one knows for sure. He studied the coastlines like scripture. He knew every cove, every shadow, every reef that could hide a galley just beneath the cliffs. Some say he painted his sails to match the sky. Others say he trained local guides, even spies, in every Christian port. But most likely, it was something simpler: wisdom, precision, and the kind of silence that leaves no footprints behind. While other commanders celebrated victories, Barbarossa vanished before the applause. His success didn't come from overwhelming power, it came from control. Of the wind, of the timing, of the fear in every sailor's chest. And that fear, it lingered long after he left the shore. Khairuddin Barbarossa once raided a Spanish coastal city and unexpectedly found dozens of Muslim prisoners in underground holding pens, waiting to be sold into slavery. What he saw stopped him cold. Men, women, even children, barely alive. Their wrists were bruised, their faces hollow. They didn't scream, they just stared, terrified. He decided to take them, but his officers warned him, "We don't have room, we'll lose the treasure." He didn't shout. He simply said, "Gold can be replaced. These lives cannot." He ordered space cleared. Extra supplies were thrown overboard. When they reached Algiers, Barbarossa said nothing, but word of what he did spread across the coast. He became more than an admiral. He became the man who didn't trade in souls. While Europe called him a pirate, Khairuddin Barbarossa ruled with discipline. On his ships, civilians were never harmed. Unarmed captives, often spared. Not because he was soft, but because he understood something deeper. True power doesn't come from cruelty, it comes from restraint. Because mercy, when shown wisely, doesn't make you weaker, it makes you unforgettable. In 1543, Khairuddin Barbarossa didn't come as a conqueror, he came as an ally, answering a rare call from the French king, uniting against a common enemy, the Habsburg Empire. But when Barbarossa's fleet approached Toulon, the city emptied. Shops were closed, homes abandoned, church bells silenced. The entire population evacuated. Officially, it was to make room for his fleet, but truth echoed louder than orders. Even as an ally, his name carried fear. The Red Beard, the man who could move ships like shadows and leave silence where cannons once roared. Yet Barbarossa made no demands, took no spoils, harmed no soul. He stayed for months, then left the city untouched. One French officer later wrote, "He never shouted, never threatened, but every man stood taller when he passed." A young officer once brought European prisoners to Barbarossa, expecting praise for taking captives. Instead, Barbarossa looked him in the eye and asked, "Were they armed?" The officer said no. "Did they fight you?" Again, no. Barbarossa ordered their release. "You win wars by defeating armies," he said, "not by caging men who never raised a sword." That day his men learned, strength means knowing when not to strike. After one of his victories, his men sang and celebrated on deck. But Barbarossa stood alone at the edge of the ship watching the sea. Someone asked him why he wasn't smiling. He replied, "When the sea takes no one today, that's the real victory." And then quietly, he returned below deck. After Arouge died, Barbarossa kept his brother's sword, rusted, chipped, blood-worn. He could have replaced it with a finer one. He never did. He carried it into battles, not for the steel, but for the memory. Every time he unsheathed it, he remembered why he fought. That sword was never polished, just held tightly, like a promise. And by the 1540s, Khairuddin Barbarossa had done what few could even imagine. He had turned a band of corsairs into the strongest navy in the Mediterranean. He had humbled kings, redrawn coastlines, protected the voiceless, and earned his place beside emperors, not by birthright, but by battle. Sea Commander knows when the tide begins to turn. He retired from active command in 1545 at the height of his power, not out of weakness, but because he believed leaders should know when to step back and not wait until they're forced to. He moved to Constantinople, where he lived out his final years in quiet dignity. He didn't chase titles. He didn't build palaces. He spent his time advising the next generation of naval commanders, helping craft the long-term vision of the Ottoman fleet. In 1546, Khairuddin Barbarossa passed away. There was no final battle, no fall from grace, just silence. But the empire didn't forget him. Barbarossa's funeral was honored by the Ottoman state. He was buried with full military honors, and a tomb, a turbe, was commissioned by the Sultan in Besiktas, near the very waters he once ruled, and not far from his own seaside mansion. In Akolomers, ceremonies are still held at his tomb, with Turkish admirals paying tribute before taking command. Centuries have passed since Khairuddin Barbarossa last commanded a fleet, but in modern Turkey, his presence has never left the shore. His tomb in Besiktas is more than a grave. It's a symbol. Every year, before a new admiral takes command of the Turkish Navy, a ceremony is held there. Officers stand in uniformed silence, paying respects to the man who once made the Mediterranean a shield for his people. No speech is needed. The legacy speaks for itself. Schools, ships, streets, even warships, all bear his name. In Istanbul, the Barbaros Hayrettin Pasha Mosque, a massive structure under construction, is dedicated to him, further proof that his legend still breathes through the fabric of the nation. In history books across the world, he's still called a pirate, But in Turkey, he's remembered as the protector, not just of coastlines, but of identity. He reminds people that power can be built on principle, that leadership means knowing when to fight and when to let others rise. Even now, when Turkish naval ships sail out, they do so with a quiet echo behind them, the voice of a man who once ruled the sea with discipline, not destruction. He is not forgotten, not by the waves, not by the country, not by time.
Khairuddin Barbarossa didn't begin as a legend. He began as a boy on an island, the son of a potter and a soldier. No palace, no bloodline, no map laid out for him. He had something greater: pain, purpose, and the will to keep going. He lost his brother. He buried friends at sea. He fought against kings who had fleets 10 times his size. And still, he rose, not because he was the most powerful, but because he was the most focused. Not because he hated his enemies, but because he loved what he was protecting. His life teaches us that power doesn't come from the crown you wear. It comes from the cause you serve. He turned grief into loyalty, loneliness into leadership, and chaos into a navy that protected millions. Barbarossa shows us that you don't need perfect beginnings to write an unforgettable story. You need discipline when it hurts, clarity when you're surrounded by fog, and the courage to choose control, even when rage feels easier. He reminds every one of us, you can come from nowhere and still move the world, that no loss is final if you rise with purpose, that the sea will test you, but it also remembers who endured the storm. Barbarossa walked away from power when others would have clung to it. He left behind no golden tomb, just a name that still sails with the wind. And if there's one lesson that lives on through him, it's this: you don't need to be born great. You just need to keep showing up with a reason worth fighting for. So now ask yourself, what would you become if you stopped running from the pain and started fighting for something greater than yourself? If life tested you like it tested him, what would you stand for? And would you keep going, even when no one else sails beside you?